his first book is The Art of Coaching High School Tennis. And then he's also written Playing Sports Right. They were two books that I recommended to people. Matter of fact, when we had the team coaching certification program for the high school coaches, The Art of Coaching High School Tennis was one of those books he got credit for. And his new book is called The Athlete-Centered Coach. And truthfully, I'm only about 3/4 of the way through the book right now. I've been running crazy with things lately. But truthfully, it looks like another bestseller to me. Bill Patton, for those of you that don't know, Bill, I don't know if you know, but our audience goes to, it goes all over the world, but in Europe, I know we have in England and in Ireland and Germany, we've been blessed to have people responding before. So they don't have the high schools over there, but I'm sure they could still. This new book I've seen you've taken a different approach on, so this is interesting. But Bill Patton is a tennis professional and is currently coaching in his 8 different high schools. He has 29 years of experience in the field, and he is the tennis professional at. Help me with the pronunciation. Was it Sequoia Country Club in Oakland, California? What is it again?
Sequoia Country Club.
Sequoia. Okay. He has coached at several schools and many great results, and mainly the players that he's had a great time maximizing their game. And I think that's the thing that most of the quality coaches are looking for is having the people get the best out of their game, and once they do that, then I think they have a good shot at life's journey. So, Bill, it's good to talk with you again. Hopefully, I was hoping, I know you were in Florida last year, but we missed you because of some medical problems Bobby and I have been going through. But hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it, and thanks for having me on the show, John.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the new book? It's, in my opinion, you're taking a different approach than the other. But what made you think of, what is the Athletic Center of Coaching, and are enough coaches aware of it, and are they doing it? And if not, why aren't more people doing it?
Well, okay, the first thing is that it's not a phrase that I created, but it is something that I started to see popping up more and more. And this is an idea that is emerging, is that the coach's sole job really is to focus on the athlete and help them to become better. And, there are things about human nature that dictate that isn't always the case. And one of those things is that about 70% of people's self-talk, the things that they say to themselves in their head, is negative. And so it's pretty hard to coach an athlete and help them succeed to their best level if you've got a very negative mindset. So it delves a lot into that, into a coach establishing a stronger, better, more positive mindset. And the other one is, I think, especially I relate to, as a younger coach, wanting to prove something, wanting to show everybody that I was good, and doing things out of sort of an ego-driven mindset, which isn't altogether bad. I mean, ego is not a bad thing. It's a neutral thing. But as I go along, and I actually, my self-concept is stronger, I'm not worried about proving myself to anyone, really. then what it does, it helps me to focus more on the athlete. So it's really about finding all the different ways that we can put the focus on something else and taking the focus off of that, whether it's championships or medals or college scholarships or, any of these other outcomes, and look at the athlete as someone who's going to go on from here. The athlete has a whole life to live. So whether we meet them when they're 8 or 11 or 14 or 18, we have our time on their timeline. I think sometimes we turn it around and we say they have their time on our timeline. So, then this is also a general sports book. So I cover difficult things. I mean, 2 of the hardest chapters that I had to write were about Dr. Larry Nassar of the women's gymnastics team and Aaron Hernandez, former star NFL tight end with the New England Patriots, and discussing them in sort of a philosophical setting of where do they fit in an athlete-centered program with athlete-centered coaches, because I don't think they do.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I assume that's one of the reasons why then you felt a need to write this book. I think that everybody is different, and I suspected. I know my coaching views changed from when I started until today, and as we grow, we all need to sit there and think about: are we still doing what we want to do? Number one, and are we doing what we set out to do?
And that is a great observation, because really, one of the things that coaches fail to do well is establish their own coaching philosophy and coming up with their why statement. Why do I want to do this? Where do I want to go with this? Where do I want to take my players, along this timeline of theirs, so, and it's easy to lose track. I mean, I have fallen off the rails before. So another thing challenging about the book was writing some, I write some stories that I've observed from afar in the world of sports, whether it's, football, baseball, basketball, Olympics, or, and tennis. And then I also write some personal stories from times that things turned out differently than I expected, but they were better because I was open to something else happening than what I thought would happen. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, I think it definitely does. I think one of the things I always admired about talking to you, we've been blessed to be able to sit down and over bread to discuss things before when you were here, and I always enjoyed that because I think that you're just honest remarks that you make, and I think that we see different things, and we all have success stories we could tell. But I know the ghosts I have are the times that I did something and it didn't work out right. And I wonder, and your decisions are not always right. And you say, would I have lost that player if I didn't take those actions? So it's not that we shouldn't talk about our successes. I think we should. But we should look at ourselves, too, and think about, was that the best action to take?
Right. Well, while you're saying that, I'm thinking of the phrase, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. And I actually really dislike that phrase because what it does, it discounts learning from winning, and also discounts learning how to win. So you can't really learn how to win by losing. So you have to learn how to win by winning. And so it's a very interesting thing, but I find that we have these little conventional sayings that we say that they don't really work, but we say them anyway, and they're filled with flaws, and if we thought a little harder and redirected our minds a little bit better, then we would get more of the results that we want. But pardon me. So another interesting thing is that there are such stories where I did exactly the right thing and it worked, but the player didn't care. And then there were times that the player wasn't doing what I asked, and it was stupefying to me. But then I discovered they were actually doing what I had told them previously. So then we stopped and we said, oh wow, I guess I trained you too good on that before. And then there were times players did things that I absolutely would not condone or recommend, but the player made it work, and they did it at a critical time. And so, after that match, I said to that girl, I said, wow, that was an amazing shot. Don't ever do that again. Right. But it was pivotal. It was pivotal. And just about everybody had an aneurysm as she ran from the baseline. Get this, use your tennis court imagination. She's in the deuce court. She's at the baseline. The opponents hit a high ball that's going to her partner's forehand volley, and she runs 30 feet in to hit a backhand volley ahead of her. But because the angle was something the other team wasn't prepared for, it was this bold surprise move that changed everything. And then they won 3 straight games and sealed the match. So, it's not something you'd ever recommend someone would do, is to run that far for a backhand volley in front of someone's forehand volley.
Right. Is that one of the reasons I've been thinking, why did you feel you should write this book? What was one of the, I imagine you have many reasons. Can you put it in 1 or 2 reasons why?
Yeah, well, I think first off, I didn't feel like I wanted to write the book. I felt like it was necessary. So, I'd heard the phrase used in different places, and I really felt like it has a place in coaching for everyone to kind of point to that and say, the athlete-centered coach. It's what we all can aspire to be. And for those of you who want to catch me doing wrong because I wrote it in the book and I'm not doing it, good for you, because it's a hard book, and I'm going to be challenged to try to live up to what's in there. So I think it was the promoting of the concept, and then also a way for coaches to make themselves more valuable. To everyone, because when you're really going at it with all your focus on the athlete and their outcomes and their timelines and the skill sets that they need to be successful in life, then people will take notice. The right people are going to pay attention to that, and you're going to attract a certain sort of silent majority of people who really are hungering for that. But they're stuck with the other coach who's doing it, solely for ego or solely for profit or, other bad motives.
Well, but I mean, our profession, when you think of it, though, I agree with you. I don't disagree. I agree with you 100%. But I think what we have to remember is that our profession is made up of humans, and humans are, are human, and there are all types of them, and that's why it's hard to sit there and say this is the absolute way you should have to do this, because people are all different. I remember one time I had a young girl from 8 years old, and when she was in high school, and taking her to a couple of games, the AAU games throughout the country and everything, knowing her, I knew she had a nervous habit. When she got uptight, she would start laughing. And I remember one time I thought she comes to the fence, and I didn't think nobody was there. And I said to her, I won't use her name, but I said to her, if I hear you laugh at all during this rest of this match, I'm letting the trainer know now that she has to be with you tomorrow because you're going to run until we have to put you in ice. And she went back on the court, handled it the way I thought it was, but meanwhile there was a young freshman behind me, and she said, Coach, I think I would cry if you ever said that to me. And I said, I probably would never say it to you. So for the next few years, I had to be careful of everything I said to this young lady.
Yeah, and I think the word you said there was absolute, and that is true. So the book is it's a collection of 107 essays, and each chapter is 1, 2, 3, maybe I think the biggest chapter is 5 pages. So you can read one chapter and think about one thing. And, that's the power of it, is that there are no absolute answers. I discuss a certain topic. I give you as complete a view as I can with my limited point of view. And then I give space at the bottom for you to write, what's your biggest takeaway from that, or what's your action item. So it's really about what the coach does with it and what they take away from it. One of the best comments I've received on the reviews of The Art of Coaching High School Tennis was from a guy who said, I don't see eye to eye with Bill on everything he writes here. And I'm like, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect, because it was General Patton who said, if everybody's thinking the same, somebody's not thinking.
Right.
So it's really to spur thought and to try to come up with some really clear thoughts on what works best, and then to open it up for people to argue with me. And then hopefully we can have some good discussions, arguments, and refine it. I'm actually looking forward to doing a second edition after I get the comments from people who've read it.
Very good. Well, personally, I don't want to argue with you. I do like the fact, and it's because of my own thing, I usually try to read things in chapters. I mean, I'll put it, go back to it after a chapter and go to the next one. And your chapters are so short. And truthfully, from my judgment of knowing Bill the way I think I know him, I know there's always something. I don't know anything. I assume there's something else in his mind that I misread. So the reason I'm only 3/4 way through this right now is I've gone back at the end of every chapter and looked at it again. I'm saying, okay, what am I missing here that Bill said in that? That chapter seemed too easy.
Oh, pardon me. Well, I think that's funny. Too easy. So don't worry. There are some chapters.
Oh, there's not many of them. Yeah, there's not many of them, but every now and then it comes up, and that's, to me, I find that fascinating. But knowing that the chapters are short, why not go back and reread it again? And there's a lot of things. And, my wife said, why are you taking, like I'm in the middle of Hillsborough College taking a course again on American history. God, you've taken American history how many times by now? But
wow,
why not? Why not learn more? Let me get to the next thing. What was the source of your inspiration there? What made you say, who influenced you to say, okay, I've got to sit there and write this?
Well, I think one of the chief influences is Sterling Strother. But even before that was a good friend of mine who the book is dedicated to, His name was Dennis Fogg, and he was a great friend. He and I were roommates, and he was a great basketball coach, and he taught me how to play basketball, which I thought was something that was impossible. So the way he taught me how to play basketball became a model for how I was going to teach everything moving forward. Because we would go play, and then he would, after we played, he would say, hey, you played like this, but here's one thing for you to work on from this game. So work on your ability to catch and shoot without dribbling. And so I would do that, and that was really amazing to see how he broke that down for me. And to the point where I actually became a fairly accomplished recreational basketball player, which was fun. And then it was during the time that he and I were roommates that I applied for my first tennis coaching job. And he was the first one who said, I think you could be a really good coach. So that affirmation from him especially really gave me something to stand on moving forward, because it's really tough when you first get started. And then, I think about people like Dick Gould and Tim Galway and Steve Kerr of the Golden State Warriors. And I look at these coaches, and Bob Melvin of the Oakland A's, one of the great managers, and each of them has an element of being incredibly athlete-centered. And so what they engender in their players is this willingness to play for them, that the player really wants to do well for the coach because of the strength of that relationship. So that, I think those are some of the influences, but there's no way in 49 years of watching sports and being fascinated with coaches that I could name all of them. But I feel like my whole life I have studied coaches.
Well, that's interesting, because the coaching changes who you coach and why and what game. And I don't know if you know it or not, but I came from a basketball background, coaching basketball. And when I went through the PTR and with my son, I always tell people I'm the other John Danise, and I probably learned more from my son, as he was one of the best coaches I knew. But the influences I had in basketball, Dennis Vandermeer encouraged me to say, no, you're right, and we all have our own theories, and he would say, I think you have something to, go out and find out. And I was ready to go home. I was talking with a gentleman who's a very famous gentleman. I won't say who he is. And I was at the bar, and my son was out with a bunch of young people, and he said, what are you thinking about, Coach? And because I was the oldest one there by far, and I says, I'm thinking about going home. And he says, why? And I said, look at these people. I never played tennis before. I come from basketball. And he convinced me to stay there, and thank God.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that interesting? And part of what the athlete-centered coach is about is catching people at these moments where it's this way or that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the exit or it's deeper in, right?
Right.
Who was it? I think it was Churchill who said, if you feel like you're in the middle of hell, keep going, right? Or somebody else said, the only way around is through. And the foreword to the book, tells the story of Sterling coming along at a time when I was ready to change to a different career. I was not having the success in my tennis career that I needed to have for my family. And so I was actively looking at, sort of going through a phase of burnout. And then this sort of chance encounter with Sterling in Northern California kind of led to one thing after the other. And as a result of that, that's when I began writing The Art of Coaching High School Tennis. So that was the summer of 2000. Thank you. That was the summer of 2013 that I was actively looking to leave tennis, and then I got invited to this backyard barbecue of tennis pros, and I went reluctantly, and then the rest is history, So I started writing the book in October of 13 and finished it in March of 14, and then it was you that gave me a hand up because you were one of the early adopters of that book. So that made a huge difference, being able to go to Florida and speak and get the reception that I got there. That helped me a lot to realize that what I was writing resonated with people. They were made better because of it. That made a difference for me.
As a coach, in my type of coaching, I'm always looking for practical advice to give in general, because everybody is different. But is there how do learning theories impact learning, do you feel?
Well, it's funny because I hope it's not a feeling, but more should be done to teach coaches learning theories because that can make the job so much easier. I have some practical advice for everybody. So one learning theory that's really amazing is something called the zone of proximal development. And so in layman's terms, that basically means that when the kids learn from each other, it's easier. So like, let's say you have a 17-year-old senior on the court and they're really good at the net, but they had their time of struggling to be a good net player, and you have them work with and explain some stuff to a 14-year-old. Because the experience is so close and so relatively new, then the younger player starts to see it as being more doable. Not only that, but then one teenager can translate what the adult is saying into a language that more easily is accommodated by the younger player. So pretty much every day that I'm on the court, there's a time of question and answer. So, let's say we're talking about doubles. All right, everybody, let's get together. What do you know about doubles? Right? And then, they give their answers. And so they're teaching during that time. And the people that don't know that answers are learning it from someone other than me. So I'm saving energy. They're engaging the zone of proximal development. That's another thing. There's another thing called prior knowledge. So one of the things that I think is universal that everyone hates, but let me know if you don't hate this, is being told the same thing over again that you already know full well. I think most people get bored. So if I get,
I think it's a challenge, and I think it's and it's funny you say that. And I'm thinking of being in Hilton Head, and I'm at the front row because I always like to, probably because of the little hearing, and I'm sitting next to Linda, and this guy is saying everything that is just, to me, was common sense, so easy. And as you know, you have your choice of where you can go, and that was my choice of where to go. And during the break, I said to Linda, God, is that the most boring? And she said to me, she said, maybe you're not focused enough, John. And so I didn't leave.
Go.
And he actually got more interest in the second half, or I got more focused.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that go into it. And, you know, great conferences have things for people at various levels. I mean, one thing that is, I think, a problem is when veteran coaches complain because there is content geared to new coaches. And so that's when I say, well, maybe you need to go to the other thing that's happening. I mean, you know, so a great conference does have a wide range of offerings for different coaches who coach in different situations with different levels of players, different ages, all of that. So, you know, I think that's an interesting thing. So if we come back to it though, so if I ask my group, what do you know about doubles? Now the kid who, instead of hearing it for the 17th time, gets to say it. Now he's the teacher because he knows it well. He feels better about that. The kids will almost generally enjoy loving to hear from their teammates more than the coach. You save yourself a lot of energy. And then a funny thing happens. You can keep asking questions, and then all of a sudden you ask a question that nobody knows the answer to. And that at that moment, an interesting thing happens. Either most of the kids on the team are going to become extremely curious about something they don't know, or they're going to rebel and they're going to not want to learn something, and you'll get a very quick gauge on what kind of team you have at that moment. But I love it when I ask a question, nobody knows the answer. I give them 10, 20 full seconds, and I look around to make sure everybody's thinking, and then I go, all right, are you ready for the answer? And it's a way to invoke their curiosity. So then that's the Socratic method of asking questions. So now another interesting thing is that education comes from the word adukos, and adukos means to draw from within. So as educators on the tennis court, or on whatever sports court we're on, our job is to draw out the information out of the players. But what do we do instead? You know, instead we use a medical model. Like, these kids are sick, and I have the medicine, so I'm going to give them the medicine and make them well. Here, take your medicine. And not too many people want to do that. Or we take an approach like we have a drill and we drill a little hole in their head, and we have our funnel and we have our bottle of information that we pour into their heads, and they're somehow supposed to assimilate that. But the problem there is that they're not engaged. So you've got the zone of proximal development, you have prior knowledge, you have the Socratic method, right, which creates more engagement.
Right.
And then go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Keep going.
Okay. So then here's another one, and probably somebody's going to want to argue with me on this, and that's fine. I say bring it. So come talk to me. But Dr. Howard Gardner of Harvard University Education Department came up with a theory called multiple intelligences. And it's a theory. It's not a law. So it's something to think about. But his theory is that people have 7 to 10 intelligences. So he doesn't even put a finite number on it for anyone. And those are visual, kinesthetic, intrapersonal, interpersonal, environmental, rhythmical, musical, rhythmical, mathematical, logical, environmental. Maybe I said something over again and probably left some out. But we have all of these things that we have going on in our head. But he became actually pretty angry when that got boiled down and made too simple, and people began to try to identify finite learning styles. So if there was a time when I used to put people in a box of, oh, you're a visual learner, so I'm only going to teach you visually because that's your strong suit. When in reality, what I also need to do is help teach the kinesthetic as well and the musical, rhythmical, and allow a player to start to experience the game on many levels and using more parts of their brain, and using more parts of your brain is more healthy and has, so many more positive effects for your lifetime. So what I generally do is early on, I try to find out what's somebody's strength, and then I also try to find which is their next strongest and try to help boost that up. And then I'll try to go after they gain some confidence, I'll try to find a weakness in how they learn and cause them to go through a little bit of cognitive dissonance to try to have to figure it out a different way with a different part of their brain. There are two common mistakes that I see on a tennis court mentally. One, paralysis by analysis. So players are out there trying to find out what was their mistake, and they want to correct their mistake. Instead of trying to analyze and correct, what they ought to do is they ought to simply be aware of what they're doing and how, as they change what they're doing, they get different results. So it's a different mindset. It's more of being a scientist and experimenting and failing and trying and trying again until you accidentally sort of do it right one time and then remembering that one. And then another thing that people do is they use subjective judgments. And this is something that you can read about in The Inner Game of Tennis. People judge their shot. They say, oh, good shot. And then they get excited, and then they miss the next one. And then they say, bad shot in their head. And then they'll probably say, okay, I have to try harder to make a good shot. And then they start to stiffen up and do worse, and they end up going down the toilet. So I try to get my players to move away from judging anything in the sport subjectively, and I try to get them to just very objectively observe what they're doing. And then we can discuss what are they doing, and then do you see how when you do this, then you get that, right? And then they go, oh, yes. So I'm like, okay, so let's try something else. And then they discover it on their own, and then who owns that lesson? The person owns it because they were the ones that made the discovery. The coach was just simply there guiding it, facilitating the discovery of how to do it.
Do you ever used your players to help you with that, or ask, what they thought of the situation, especially if you're seeing somebody kind of beating up on themselves? Or
Oh, yeah, all the time. In fact, sometimes I get chided by my players, Generally in a first lesson with somebody, I tend to be a little bit talkative. And so I've had some people say, hey, I really need you to stop talking because I'm spending so much time listening to you that I can't do anything. So that's another interesting thing that plays into this is different people have different abilities to process information verbally, right? I mean, like those kids that can raise their hand as soon as the question is asked, and then other kids need, 1,000, 1,000. Oh, I get it, but by that time, the answer's already been given, and the so-called smart kid got it right, but the frustrated kid who just verbally processes a little bit slower is just as intelligent, but can't come up with the answer as fast.
Yeah, no, that's a valuable point. I like the idea of getting the team involved. I like the way you use stories and and your teaching and what the underlying principles what you're trying to do. For every practice, I would hand out a quote or a short story from a pro, and every player before practice would have to read it, and then they would sign it. And then needless to say, that was at the end, because at the end of practice, coach would be asking, what does that mean to you? And so now you're getting the kids explaining what they see. And sometimes you go, to find out if they're doing it. And I would sit there with certain people that were always that first that you mentioned, 1 second they have an answer. I'd say give somebody else first. But for instance, little thing,
absolutely.
I remember one time I had in there, Coach Danise is looking for the reason with this year's team, our number one goal is to repeat as district champion. And, how many people agreed with that? And there was, maybe 1/3 of the team. And I said, have I ever talked about that? Have I talked about winning, and we're going to be winners, and you're going to be a winner, and winning is going to help you through life journey? Have I talked to you about repeating it this year? And, so once the kids start finding out, sometimes you have to be careful the way you word it, and sometimes I would word it just to make sure that they're reading it and not just signing it. Well, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, meaning is pretty much everything. And yeah, I mean, I generally tell at least 3 or 4 good stories in a week. And generally I will tell stories about players who've played for me before. Because why? Because then it's something that my players can relate to. Sure. They can understand a story about another team that's going through something that's similar to what they're going through. Or a player who was, facing a certain setback, and how did they handle that? Or they made a breakthrough, and why? How did they make their breakthrough? And then we get done with the story, and I go, all right, what about that story resonates with you? And and I go, we're not leaving until I get 3 or 5 different answers. So,
right.
And at first it's like pulling teeth, but after a little while, they get used to the fact that they're going to have to do some thinking,
Right.
And this is something I think coaches can also see. The athlete-centered coach helps the athlete to think their stuff through so that they are the owners of the expertise, because they're the ones that are going to have to hit the shot at match point down. The coach doesn't hit it, right? So the more we can do to empower the kids to be the decision makers and the owners of the information, then the more that they can go out and translate it into their performance. But if it's just an idea that's being enforced on them by the coach, then you're going to get a whole range of obligation, rebellion, hesitancy, reluctance, right? So it's about getting that buy-in.
Yeah.
One thing that's funny for me is how easily I get my players to come to the net, and other coaches complain all day long about how they don't know how to do that. And it's really not that hard, because all really you need to do is give them enough exposure and not criticize them so much. And then, pardon me, and they'll find a way to be successful.
Why don't you get a drink of water? And I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to end this here. But let me just tell the people that next week, well, first of all, I see a couple of people that hung on here. I'll remind everybody, I appreciate that you probably have something important to say, but for the last about 4 years, I don't take calls in between. I only answer callers that I know who they are, because I'm just computer illiterate and it takes me too long to react, and I had a bad experience about 4 years ago. So I appreciate you staying on. Hopefully, if you have something that you want to say, send me an email, Coach Danise, FHSTCA, at att.net, and I do want to hear what you have to say. But the only calls that I take during the broadcast are, sometimes we have multiple guests on, and the calls I know. So I've seen some people hang up. A couple of you that hung on, I appreciate that. I'm sure you found Bill as interested as I did, but I'm not going to answer the call. Next week, our mentor is Ashley Hobson. Ashley Hobson is another person like Bill that's been training at our for the Florida High School Tennis Coaches Association. Matter of fact, 3 years ago at the USTA campus, he was the feature of the whole thing. He's a heck of a gentleman. He's just continuously giving. He has over 30 years of ATP, WTA, ITF coaching experience. He's coached in 60 countries. He's a Davis Cup and a Federation Cup coach. He was the Hong Kong China national coach for 5 years, and many people consider him the best racket man, but he's more than that. And those of you that, if you've ever been to Inspiration Academy, it's just an extraordinary place, and he's an extraordinary man. And I think you're going to find him just as enjoyable as you do Bill today. I would like to remind everybody that you could tune in anytime. When we're through with this, I will post this on about 50 coaching organizations throughout the coach. Just go, when you see the yellow ball logo, just hit the yellow ball logo, and you'll be able to hear it at any time that you want to listen to it. The Almighty willing, I will be talking with you again next week. There is an interest in Florida Tennis Magazine, should be out in about 2 weeks. Jim March, the editor, says everybody's not going to love me, but the truth of the matter is hasn't loved me for years, as long as my family and my best friends do. That's all right. But I think there's some things that had to be said about high school tennis in the USTA. And I've given you my opinion, and I respect yours, and I'll be glad to listen to yours. Bill, we have about 2 minutes left. If you could tell people how to reach you, and you have the last 2 minutes. Go ahead.
All right. So I think the last thought that I want to leave with people is to consider sort of on a daily basis is, what am I doing about me? Because with me it often is. Or is it about them? And, taking that moment to redirect towards the player can make all the difference. And then, you can find me on Facebook. Pretty easy to find there. And then also you can email me at 720degreecoaching@gmail.com. 720degreecoaching@gmail.com. And I'm Bill Patton 720 on Instagram.
Very good. And I think that last thing is the important thing. We have to remember it's about the student. You know, if we're all thinking of them, I think that's the important thing. I know a few weeks ago I was accused of being I explained my Judeo-Christian values that I was brought up and influenced, and do you have to be a Christian to coach? No, you don't have to be a Christian to coach. But I think if you coach from a loving perspective and you know, looking to give to them, then it's easier. And if you don't know who your students are, it's hard to love them. You've got about 30 seconds left. Bill, did I lose you? I guess I lost Bill. Well, you enjoyed him like I did, and I will talk to you next week, the Almighty willing. Bye-bye.